For more than 5 decades, Dan Rather has had a front row seat to world history. This week he was in South Dakota with his grandson as part of a road trip across the Midwest.
Dan Rather and I have mutual friends, and because of that I was able to spend an hour with him Monday afternoon for a wide-ranging conversation about politics, the media, and some South Dakota history. It's a story you'll only see on KSFY. In the summer, a lot of families visit Mount Rushmore. Martin Rather made the trip with his grandfather.
You know, I'm so lucky to have my grandfather. He's one of the kindest, most genuine, humble people that I could ever come across.
His grandfather, 85-year-old Dan Rather, the legendary newsman whose work has put him at the center of most of the pivotal events of the 20th and 21st centuries.
I learned as much from Martin or more than he learns from me, but mostly we learn from the trip and the people we come in contact with.
The road trip started in Texas, then Oklahoma, Kansas, and Nebraska before arriving at Mount Rushmore. Martin studies at Rice University and contributes to the Elder Rather's website, News and Guts. I spoke with both at the Mount Rushmore Amphitheater. Dan Rather covered the 1972 presidential campaign of Republican Richard Nixon and Democrat George McGovern of South Dakota. He says McGovern didn't run a strong campaign, but Rather thinks highly of him to this day.
Of all the people I've met in political life, George McGovern perhaps believed as deeply and was principled in his beliefs as anyone I ever met.
2 days before arriving at Mount Rushmore, the Rathers visited the Oklahoma City Bombing Memorial to honor the 168 men, women, and children who died 22 years ago.
I think it's impossible to go there and not be overcome, at least in some way, by emotion.
For the last 5 years, we have reported on the FBI's finding that Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh had the Sioux Falls Federal Courthouse on his list of targets.
Whether it had been in Sioux Falls, Oklahoma City, or Little Rock, wherever it was.
Rather was aware of that Sioux Falls connection and says had McVeigh detonated a truck bomb on Phillips Avenue, the effect would have reverberated throughout the Midwest and the nation in an equally frightening way.
I think the impact would have been tremendous wherever he exploded a federal building.
Dan Rather is finishing up a book to be released in November called What Unites Us. Part of this trip is a way to research what people in Middle America think of America right now.
These are definitely times in which we face a pretty stark choice in where we go from here.
This is not normal. What's happening, much of what's happening with the Trump presidency is not normal.
Rather was a White House correspondent when President Richard Nixon resigned in 1974 from the fallout of Watergate. He urges caution in comparing Watergate to the investigations embroiling the Trump White House.
We're not at Watergate. We're not nearly at Watergate. No crime has been proven, much less anybody indicted.
Rather does have great concerns about how the Trump White House responds when questioned about its activities, in specific, the use of the term fake news.
Calling almost everything that is not sweetheart coverage, everything that you don't find positive for your political point of view, fake news, really diminishes the meaning of fake news.
Rather also sees as troubling the White House decision to ban cameras from press briefings with reporters. The last time cameras were allowed was June 29th.
Quite honestly, for the world's leading democracy, a constitutional republic based on the principles of freedom and democracy, this is ridiculous. And I hope the president will soon come to recognize it as that.
Both Rathers are adept at social media. Martin sees it as a way to more directly connect with decision makers.
It has provided access and ability for communication, especially to people in power, that has become far quicker.
Dan Rather sees it as a way to tell the stories he wants to tell. His Facebook page alone has more than 2.3 million followers.
You know, you and I have known each other at a distance for a while, but I believe that news is what people need to know that somebody somewhere, mostly in power, doesn't want people to know. That's news.
In October, Dan Rather will be 86 years old. I asked him why does he think people still want to know what's on Dan Rather's mind.
I've always tried to be, and I think I am, authentic. You can argue with some things I say, some story or some position you think I'd take. But I do think that there are some people, by no means overwhelming numbers of people, who say, you know, he is what he appears to be.
He says that he has that book coming out in November called What Unites Us. He also says that, God willing, if his health holds up, that it's not the last book he'll be writing. He's still very much active in the conversation and wants to be.
What an incredible man. And just to bring his grandson along and
Yeah.
tour the Midwest, what was it like getting to meet him and sit down with him for a few moments?
It was very interesting. We spent about an hour with him.
Okay.
And it's one of those things where when you're talking to him, I wasn't nervous during the interview, but it was also very apparent to me, I'm talking
Yes.
to Dan Rather, someone that I had watched for years on television growing up. And I want to say a word about his grandson too. So well-spoken, so thoughtful. He's the type of guy that you would want as a grandson. You know, just very upstanding, and they make a neat little couple on that.
And a
trip.
college student at Rice,
Yeah.
he has got a bright future ahead with
Yeah.
a grandfather like that, and just the dedication he has to the business as well.
Yeah, it was very interesting speaking to both of them. Glad we had the opportunity.
Very cool. Yeah, great story, Brian.
Thank you. Great.